Hello, 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 and welcome. Welcome to this awesome webinar. My name is Alex, and I'm glad to meet you all. Yeah, so please drop like the plus or add or exclamation mark in the chat to make sure that I'm perfectly audible and you can hear me well. Well, I would assume that Uh, everything works perfectly fine. So let's begin. All right. So our agenda for today is that we are going to talk about Sunstone. What is the Sunstone? How to use it? How to access it? And so on. What are the generic settings of the Sunstone? Right. So the virtual networks. We're going to talk about the virtual networks. We are going to touch marketplace and apps, and obviously virtual machine templates as one of the important parts of OpenNebula, and we'll end up with deploying a virtual machine. So you can follow along, or in case you can just watch and then try to follow along the recording because this session is being recorded. All right, let's continue. So the Sunstone, that is the graphical user interface. So that is how you're supposed to interact with OpenNebula. Um, Obviously, we do have a very decent command line with pretty much everything that can be done using the graphical user interface also can be done using the command line, right? So, but obviously, graphical user interface is something that a lot of you prefer, and that's why we are constantly making it better and better. So, if it's not proxied, right? So, out of the box, this one's going to listen on a port 2616. Now you can install a reverse proxy and then make it listen on 443 with your appropriate TLS certificate and so on and so forth. But originally it is 2616. Now then we also have the built-in one-time passcode password MFA. So you can enable it and it works out of the box. So anything like Google Authenticator or Bitwarden, LastPass, whatever can generate a code can be used to have those uh, MFAs. And then another good thing is that it is the same for administrators and cloud users. So it doesn't matter what is your as the user what's your responsibility or what are your permissions in OpenNebula, that the entry point is always the same. You are going to have a slightly different view, so the less options are going to be available to you, but in the end of the day it is still the same entry point, still the same graphical user interface. And one slight note that is very good to mention, it's worth to mention right now, that if you installed as per guide in using the mini one, so the easy way how to start with OpenNebula, then you actually have two Sunstones, right? So there is one that listens on a port 80 by default, if you install from mini one, and the one that listens on a 2616. So the one that's in listens on a port 80, it's also called Sunstone. The only thing that is the older one, it's deprecated, but it's there for compatibility reasons. And so again, I don't want you to wonder like, hey, this one has the name Sunstone, that one has the name Sunstone. What's the difference? Well, the one is the old version of a Sunstone, and then the 2616. So that is the latest and greatest, and that is the preferred version of Sunstone that you're supposed to use, of course. Now, if we will connect to that port, as you can see, 2616, and then you are going to land into that onto that login screen. So the login screen, that's where you're supposed to enter your username and password, right? So the password is the one that you're supposed to have when you install OpenNebula from the mini one, and you kind of provided that. Otherwise, you can always cat the specific directory, a specific file, and that is going to uh, tell you what your password is. So just in case, let me connect to my server, right, in a moment. So that would be, of course, secure shell. Then this. And so as the one admin, you can easily cut the var lib1.1.1 auth. And this one's going to tell you what is your excuse me, what is your current username and, or not the current, what's the username and the password that was set for the top tier administrator when you were installing OpenNebula. So yeah, that's where to look up in case you're following along and you don't know what's your password is. Now, one admin is the top tier administrator, right? So that is the most powerful user in the ecosystem of OpenNebula. So one admin can access literally everything, can control everything, can destroy anything, right? And this user is just unstoppable. You cannot limit it with anything. So be very careful who has the permissions. Now, one admin is the part of one admin group. So we have a group that has the same name, one admin. Now, if a user becomes a part of that group, that's it. User will be granted with the same permissions as the one admin user, which means Almighty can do everything. So again, be very careful who is the part of that user group, because that's pretty much keys from the kingdom. Now, as soon as you log in, you are presented with the dashboard. We have some quick links to jump to your VMs, VM templates, images, and virtual network. So all that is laid there. And then you have the left-hand panel with all other menus. So these are the quick shortcuts. Now, I mentioned that the view is going to be different for different users. That's indeed like that, but the layout remains the same. What changes is the amount of tabs accessible on the left. So let's open some of these. For example, infrastructure, uh, networks, and templates, right? So right now I have the admin view, which gives me effectively an access to every part of OpenNebula. Now, your users either go with the cloud view or user view. So, as the one admin, you can switch between all of these and pretty much see how your users are going to look at OpenNebula. So, I've just clicked cloud, which is the least privileged user view. So it has the least amount of available tabs. And as you can see, we have the instances. So we can see our virtual machines and services. We have VM templates. We have apps. We have users, and then personal settings. And that's effectively it, right? So we cannot access, for example, individual images right from there. We cannot access groups and so on and so forth. So that is how you can declutter, effectively declutter the interface so it looks more or less appropriate to that user's specific needs. Now, you see, because obviously I would like to stress out a little bit that this is a soft limiter, right? So with if I'm one admin, right, and I will technically, with some of the shenanigans, I could revoke myself from all of the other views. So let's say I have only cloud view and there is no way in the front end I can go and access any other view. Now, if I do have access to the command line, I still can do what one admin supposed to do. So do whatever I want, right? So that is quite important thing to remember is that if your user has more permissions than the view allows and the user can access the command line, then it's not going to stop or prevent this user to, let's say, delete images, stop virtual machines, edit virtual networks, and so on and so forth. Right. So keep that in mind that this is effectively a way how to just declutter and make um, an interface more simplistic and a little bit easy to use and not to overwhelm your users with a tons of options that OpenNebula can present. Right. So then we go to our individual settings. That's where we can set the preferred schema. So obviously, a lot of us in tech field prefer dark mode, right? So it looks cool, and I do agree with that. But for like the screencast and webinar purposes, I enjoy more the light menu, the light theme. So I will proceed with light one, although you do the way you wish. Or leave it as system, and then it's going to switch between the light and dark mode, depends on what are your system settings at the moment. So let's switch to the light mode. Then the language of the interface, right? So the default endpoint, if you have multiple zones that you can do like this. Then the default view. So what is the default view when you land? Because the user, as well as one admin, but the user also may have different views. It may have a user view, it may have group view, cloud view, or even any other custom view that you will create, because you can effectively create your own views and give it a little bit of a custom touch and custom feel in case you need that. So yeah, it is possible. Slight mention, not in the front end. You will need to access the command line and then do that in the command line, edit some, text files, but it's not rocket science. So that's pretty much simple. Anyhow, so your user can have multiple views, and then user can select what would be the default view when you land into when you log in into the Sunstone. Now, then you also can disable the dashboard animations if you don't like to, and use the full screen information on data tables. Otherwise, there would be like a resizable small boxes that you can bring up or you can bring down. So again, that is up to your preference. Now, these are the labels, so you can tag your resources with some specific labels like dev, prod, or something like that, or whatever. And yeah, so you can effectively create them right here. Now, another very important thing is the secure shell public key. Now, if you install it from the as from the mini one, right, as you're supposed to do if you follow along, then the SSH public key is pre-populated, so you don't need to tackle it. But every new user that you will create, the SSH public key is going to be empty. Right. So where it matters, when you create a virtual machine, you would like to connect that virtual machine if this virtual machine has a network. Now, there are multiple options, right? How to connect to your virtual machine via the VNC as the example, or using the secure shell. Now, uh, if you're going to provide your secure shell public key right here, then out of the box by default, that obviously is editable, but out of the box by default, this secure shell public key will be added to the authorized keys file on your virtual machine that you're going to deploy. So you will be able to, if networking obviously allows that, you'll be able to passwordless to conduct the passwordless SSH connection to your newly created virtual machine, which is very good, right? So you can connect straight away and configure it the way you wish, or install some software if you'd like to. So quite a decent feature. Now, in order that to work, obviously you need to add the secure shell public key to your profile, as well as you can create the login token, right? So you can authenticate using the command line, or if you going to build something to interact with OpenNebula's API, you can also create a token, and then that's where you will register your MFA. So again, that would be the way to go if you would like to use MFA. So these are the user settings, so you can fine tune and kind of give it a little bit of your personalized touch. And as well as I would like to stress out, you really would like to enroll your secure shell public key. Right. So that is a little bit about these settings. What else you can access? Again, as the one admin, you have access to pretty much everything. And that includes the infrastructure. And then there is the hosts. That's where you can look at your hosts and uh, pretty much add some of the attributes to check out how busy the hosts are, and so on and so forth. Right. So now, one of the important parts of any virtual machine deployment is giving some kind of a network, right? So because you would like your virtual machines to connect to either the internet or intranet, or even just communicate with each other if needed. For example, if you deploy something more complex than one VM, let's say you deploy a web page with the database, and database is located on a separate virtual machine, then obviously you would like these virtual machines to communicate. How they can communicate? Well, obviously using the virtual network. Now, OpenNebula supports a multitude of virtual network standards. That includes Simple Bridge, that includes the Open vSwitch, that includes VXLAN or .1Q. So if you're using VLANs, then you also can benefit from these VLANs and create a virtual network out of that. Now, your virtual networks can be accessed by navigating to the network's virtual networks. That's going to list all your currently configured virtual networks, and it's going to allow you to create new virtual networks by just simply clicking plus. Now, you're supposed to give your virtual network a name. So my net as the example. And then you need to select the type of this network. So either it's bridge, if you'd like to benefit from security groups, which is effectively a firewall on a host. So you don't need to configure any firewall on your virtual machine. You can configure it on the host. If you would like to benefit from these security groups, then you still would like to use bridged network, then you're supposed to use bridge and security groups. Now, then there's obviously .1Q, VXLAN, Open vSwitch, and Open vSwitch with VXLAN support. Now, security groups, these are going to work only with bridge and security groups network type, .1Q, and VXLAN. So keep this in mind. If you'd like to proceed in with usage of security groups, then you will need to pick up either of these three network types. Now, okay, I will proceed right now. Just simply create just a network with just a simple bridge and nothing extraordinary. Now, what else you can do? You can create the network in the host private host networking, so which basically means that within the same broadcast domain, the virtual networks will be able to, the virtual machines will be able to communicate with each other. But let's say from the outside, you will not be able to reach them that easy. Now, sometimes it's very important to kind of isolate, and if you have some kind of multi-homed router that will connect your virtual machines uh, with uh, with the network, then you can have one private host networking and one public networking, and then use this virtual router to uh, connect your virtual machines with the network. Right. So then there is also the clustering, because you will need to attach your resource like virtual network to any of the clusters, right? So, and by default, it's going to be a member of a default cluster. So if you not going to point anything, that's supposed to take the default cluster, or you can forcibly select that. But by default, let's just agree that by default, everything goes to a default cluster. And if you are not going to specify it otherwise, right? So you, because when you create, you can specify a different cluster, and that includes the virtual networks, that includes data stores, and that also includes hosts. When you add a host, it may become a member of a different cluster. Now, it's worth to mention that things like virtual networks, things like data stores, these can be members of multiple clusters, while your host is always a member of a one single cluster. So keep that in mind. And well, pretty much cluster the uh, is the homo- is a set of homogeneous resources. That means that your servers, your hosts in the cluster, they have the same level of access to all the virtual networks in this cluster and data stores in this cluster. Right. Let's proceed to the next uh, next part, which is advanced options. Now, with the advanced options, here's the thing, right? So you must specify the range, which is effectively the size of this virtual network. Now, you're supposed to add a range, and it might be the IP range, so V4, V6, or combined, or that might be just the Ethernet range, which means you will only hand out the MAC addresses and not the IP addresses. Whatever your case might be, you may want to have static IP addresses. You may want to have the external DHCP. At least Ethernet range must be there. So without that, you will not be able to use that network, right? Because your virtual machine with the virtual network card supposed to have some kind of MAC address. So bare minimum would be just simply Ethernet, and then you're supposed to define the size of it. Now, for this demonstration, I'll just create something like 192, 168, 20, 20, and we'll set the size of this network to be 100 uh, unique IP addresses, right? So, and here we go. So now we have a small network with 100 IP addresses, and I can use them and assign them to my virtual machines. Now, if you have a network that you would like to place your virtual machines into, but you can, and you would like, let's say, set 100 IP addresses, starting from the IP like I have, like 2020. But there's something in the middle. Now, what is the solution for that? Well, the solution would be you go up to that. Let's say I have a reserved IP address 192, 168, 20, 25, right? So I will need to create a network with four IP addresses starting from the .20, and then add another range with 192, 168, 20, and I don't know, let's say 50, and add on the last batch of IP addresses, right? So again, if there is something in the middle, then you supposed to do it like that. So instead of just wildly uh, adding all IP addresses, even if there is something in the middle occupied. Now, your security groups are placed right here. Again, we talked about the security groups a bit, so that's where you need to select them. You can adjust quality of services for the inbound and outbound traffic for this virtual network. And then the context. Context is quite important because that's where you are going to define the network address, network mask, if needed, gateway and DNS, again, if needed, and the method, which is very important right here, the method of assigning those IP addresses. Or, right? And then you have pretty much three options, right? So you have the DHCP, which means the external DHCP is going to take care of it. That's, well, when you just only setting up a network with MAC addresses, then DHCP is the way to go if you would like your external DHCP to configure that. Then you just can skip the IPv4 configuration, so completely skipping that, or you go with static. So static is also a default one. So what it means that the network card on your virtual machine will be configured with the static IP address from the range that you've defined, right? So that effectively saves you a little bit of time. Alternatively, you will need to boot up the VM, connect to that VM via the VNC because you don't have any networking as nothing is configured there. So, and configure all of the IP addressing there manually. Alternatively, just go with the static based on the context one, and then it is going to hand out the IP addresses from the range that you've defined here. So quite a convenient way to go. And then you click finish, and your virtual network just created. Now, you also can further shape it and use the network reservations to reserve a chunk of IP addresses into a separate network, right? So you can create that reservation and then provide this reservation to some users and not providing them access to the original network, right? So that pretty much creates a child network for this network, which is again very convenient if you'd like to at least somehow separate the access for your users. Now, think with virtual networks, just to be aware of, if you no longer need this network, but you have at least one virtual machine that's using this network, you will not be able to delete it, right? So the second thing is that if you have a reservation, right? So let's say 10 IP addresses created and reserved from the parent network. These are right here. So these, even though it looks like a separate network, it is a child network. So if we look at the leases, current leases, you can see that there is the network with the ID2 that that has these reservations. It holds these reservations, which again means that you can no longer delete this virtual network, the parent virtual network. You will need to delete or take care of the child network first, and then you can go and remove the original parent network. So keep this in mind, especially when you build some kind of automation via the API or whatever. That if there is at least one lease, that's it. Network cannot be deleted. Right. So then the only thing that I will need to take care of is to slightly adjust the DNS setting on my virtual network one, the one that I'm going to use for deploying a virtual machine, because well, uh, a lot of the time, um, especially if you're using some kind of a cloud provider, they don't like when you set up your own DNS without their permissions. So that's why I'm going to change the DNS and I'm going to set it to something like 1111. And if you're following along, then please also make sure that your DNS is set to something that definitely going to work. Right. Cool. So let's proceed with some questions. Quickly, I'm going to answer that since they are about the networking, I think. If I have a several hosts on a several location, all of them standalone, can I manage all of them uh, from one central and a separate network VM from one central server? Well, a centralized OpenNebula can control multiple hosts and their individual VMs. And if it's like the multiple locations with their own networking, then you definitely can also create uh, dedicated networks for each location. So yeah, it's completely possible. Just make sure that the communication between OpenNebula and KVM hosts that you are planning to control uh, happens without any issues. That there's like a bunch of ports that needs to be open aside from the secured shell. So the monitoring happens and some other things. So yeah, that is possible, and just make sure that the communication works in both directions. Felipe asks, does OpenNebula networking setup has any routing capability? You can install a virtual router appliance, but by default, OpenNebula is not going to kind of become a router, right? Because you need, so the type of port that we're using is bridge. So you're adding your physical Ethernet to a bridge, and that pretty much acts like a switch and not like a router. But again, we have the virtual router appliance that can route your traffic from the, let's say, the public network to your isolated network. And is it possible to add my organization name on top of the UI? Well, you can substitute the logo. So that's the one that you have here. That's the OpenNebula. You can substitute it with your own logo. So yeah, it is possible. Just I will refer you to the documentation to find out in which place you're supposed to place your logo in PNG or JPEG format, and then which file you should edit to point to that logo. So it is definitely possible. Right. So let's proceed with this further. Thanks for your questions. I was really glad that we have questions, and it's not just me simply talking, but I can also answer your questions. Again, use chat if you have any questions regarding to the training to this webinar. Then feel free to share them in the comment section. Thank you. Right. So we have our virtual network. Presumably, virtual machines would be able to connect with the virtual network. Awesome. But we need to run those virtual machines. How to run virtual machines in OpenNebula? Now, there are a few things to consider, right? So, first thing first, we, in order to deploy a virtual machine, you need to have such thing as virtual machine template. Virtual machine template defines the the way how your further virtual machines are going to look like, right? So that includes the disks, that includes virtual NICs, that includes also the resources that your virtual machine is going to have, like the CPU, like the memory, and so on and so forth. Now, we need this virtual machine template. Virtual machine template, in order to run your virtual machine, your operating system, requires an image, right? So, image is some snapshot of a disk. Treat it like that. It potentially could be a bootable OS, an empty disk, a disk with the data, right? So, it all of that we call images, right? And then where to get those images and virtual machine templates in the first place. You can get them from our public marketplace because um, the thing is that OpenNebula image is um, is not a, a vanilla vanilla image of an operating system, right? It's the operating system plus a layer called contextualization. So um, this is how OpenNebula can, let's say, configure a network, set the host name, set the time zone, um, with the help of parameters, so you don't need to log in and configure all that manually, right? So the source of these pre-built, ready-to-use images compatible with OpenNebula is the marketplace, and we have our public marketplace. Marketplace can be public, marketplace can be private, so you can host your own private marketplace, and that's where you will get these. Now we go to the storage, to the marketplaces to check out which marketplaces are enabled. So the OpenNebula Public is the public marketplace. And then we have apps, which is the list of all images that we have in this registry. So you can download this one and start using it. Now we also have the community marketplace. It's not coming uh, kind of built a packed or built in into this installation, but if you will look in the documentation, you can figure out the way how to add it. It's pretty much simple. You just need to place the correct parameters and select some correct options. So it's not a problem. But yeah, by default, it is not there. Excuse me for the noise. There's just a little one, uh, not very happy about what happens. Okay, so proceeding to the apps, you have all those images, and you can download any image onto your OpenNebula environment. So let's search for, I don't know, Alma Linux, and you can see that there are a handful of these Alma Linux images. So Alma Linux 9, Alma Linux 8, and then for AMD 64 or Arch 64. Now, in order to get this image, you need to import it onto the data store. Now, have a look at this right now. We have the name and then we have the VM template name because this image is bundled with the virtual machine template. Again, in OpenNebula, we are not deploying a virtual machine from an image. We are always deploying virtual machine from the VM template. That's why VM template is so important. You can name it the way you wish. Just make sure you don't have any Alma Linux 9 in this case in your environment already, because you cannot have a same named VM templates and same named images there, right? So let's hit the next button, and now we need to select the correct data store. Now, a brief intro into the data stores. We have totally by default 3 data stores. We have the system data stores. That's where you have your images when your virtual machines are running. Then we have image data store. That's where your images when they are at rest. So whenever you download an image or import an image via the command line using your computer and the upload button, or getting it from the marketplace, then you are going to place it onto the image data store. And then we also have the files, which basically contains some kind of plain text files. I know PDF scripts, binaries, whatever you may need to be added to that virtual machine. But image data store, it's where you're supposed to download your images. Now, what we can have there is the local data store, or it can be shared. So it can be something that's located on the network. It could be something like iSCSI. It could be anything like NAS, SAN, whatever. So pretty much anything can become a data store, just a matter how you add it. But by default, if you installed from the menu one, then we have all data stores located on uh, on the uh, on the host itself. So there is nothing shared on the network, because in this case we're just using a single server setup. All right, so let's hit finish button, and then we are starting to import the image and virtual machine template. Now, VM template effectively is just a bunch of text. That's why VM template will be there just in a light speed. Now, when it comes to images, then it may take some time for image to appear in the ready state, because image is the actual snapshot of a disk, so it may have some weight, right? At least a couple of gigs, depends on the software that you have there. So it takes a little bit of a while in order to become ready to use. So obviously that all depends depends on what uh, type of image you're downloading. So image is there, virtual machine template is there, and that makes this Alma Linux 9 ready to be deployed. But we are going to proceed with Alpine Linux, as it's more lightweight and it's suitable pretty much to every environment. Doesn't matter if it's like the KVM virtualization or it's the software virtualization QEMU, which potentially can be used as well for the demonstration purposes, or some small POCs, or just to try out the OpenNebula. Now, as I mentioned, virtual machine templates are kind of going to tell you about going to define how your virtual machine will look once deployed. So any adjustments that you would like to make also needs to be done at the virtual machine template level. You can clone your virtual machine template. So instead of editing the one that you've downloaded from the marketplace, just create a clone. And when you clone it, so let's do Alpine Linux, and then let's add a date. So it's 2025, 05, and 14. Right. So as you can see, the clone with images checkbox remains unchecked. So what does it mean? It means that we're just going to clone the template, but both templates are going to refer the same image. Right. And then once cloned, we can adjust it, make sure that the vanilla Alpine Linux, the original template, is there. So just in case we need to revert back, or in case we've ruined something, we always have the original one. Of course, we always can download it from the marketplace once again, but that kind of saves you a little bit of time and hustle. Right, before we're going to proceed with updating the Alpine Linux template, let me have a look at the questions. Okay, so we have a question. If I have my own image or OVA from ESXi, for example, what format I need to upload and create a template? So with OVAs, we are currently baking a very good tool that will help you to convert the OVA images into the OpenNebula OpenNebula images. So uh, simply throwing an OVA is not going to fly. You need to convert it using the one swap. So that's in the process of development, but there is also one swap that helps you with the migration of the current virtual machines from the ESXi hosts. So yeah, I would refer you to that. So there is just look for one swap OpenNebula, and you will get to the public repository of that tool. And then the template would be just a simple template. So you just need to create a template for that image. And what is the difference between persistent and non-persistent? So the difference between these two is the way how image is being treated by OpenNebula. So you see, when you deploy, let's say, an Alpine Linux, what happens is that it's going to create a virtual machine, and depends on the settings, but let's take a very simplistic, very simplistic approach. The uh, image is going to get cloned, and this clone will be moved to a system data store, and this virtual machine is going to operate with a clone, not the original. Once you destroy that virtual machine, the image on that system data store will be discarded, and any changes that you made are going to vanish, right? Because, well, you're operating effectively with a clone. If the persistent, if the image is set to persistent, then you are going to operate or take all the actions on the original image, which means that all the changes that you made will be preserved, right? So the software you installed and so on and so forth. Now, if you have a non-persistent image, then you can deploy as many virtual machines as you wish. Uh, as many virtual machines as you wish from that image. Thousands, hundreds, doesn't matter. If you're because you're effectively cloning and operating on a cloned image. If you are setting this one to persistent, then only one virtual machine can claim this image at a time. So you basically, I would say the use case, if you have some kind of an image with a data, you would like this to changes uh, would preserve whenever you make some kind of changes, like writing some data, and then you would like to run some further analytics on that. So you'd like this changes to be there, and you also don't want this image to be changed right, while you're working with this data. Or if you, let's say, one virtual machine is changing the data, and then another virtual machine is going to perform some kind of analytics on the same data, you would like the second VM to always have the latest and greatest data, right? So you don't want it just to work on the outdated one. So that then it might be a case for something like persistent image, right? So yeah, but effectively the difference is multiple VMs on a non-persistent image, one VM with a persistent image. As easy as that. Apps are OpenNebula images to run as virtual machines. Yeah, so the apps is the list of all images available, all the virtual machine, uh, like all these. Yeah, let's simplify it. All the virtual machine images available from all of the marketplaces that you've added. But these effectively are virtual machines, right? So it may be like the virtual machine with some kind of application on top of that, like for example, this service WordPress or service virtual router or service media.io. So it has some kind of application installed there. Or as in case of Alma, it is the vanilla operating system just with that contextualization package added on top of that. But yeah, that will end up as the virtual machine. We also support the LXC containers, so the Linux containers are also there. But that is a different story with a different marketplace and with different host type, obviously. Okay, I hope I've answered all of your questions. Let's get back to editing the virtual machine template. Because as I mentioned before, the virtual machine template is basically a set of images, virtual network cards, and parameters for your future VM. Settings, some of the settings can be adjusted only by the administrator. Some of the settings are going to be available for the adjustment by the user who's going to instantiate that virtual machine or deploy that virtual machine. And then we also have the multi-VM deployments. These we call services, and these are going to rely on multiple virtual machine templates. But obviously, it's not the topic of this webinar today. So follow up, we do have some of things like one key webinar, the Kubernetes webinar, and this one actually is about a service. Okay, so the virtual machine templates, all your templates are going to be listed here. And once you can have a look at it, you can change the permissions, the ownership, and then just click update if you would like to update it. So let's update this one. Let's set the KVM. Let's do the memory of 512 megs, just to give it a little bit of memory, right? So we can change the logo, we can change the CPU settings, we can change the ownership. So whenever we instantiating that virtual machine, it will end up with the different ownership settings. Then we go to the advanced options, and that's where a lot of fun begins, right? So that's where you can change the disks, right? So right now we have only the bootable operating system there, so the snapshot of the bootable OS, but you can additionally add something like the empty data disk or disk with the data or any other image in case you need to. Now then we go to the network tab, and that's where we can change the virtual networks. We can add more virtual networks or add an alias in case you want your virtual machine, let's say, to have multiple IP addresses in the same network using the same virtual network card. So that is doable from this interface. So the OS and CPU tweaking. So if you need to tweak the operating system or some CPU features, you can add them here. So the PCI device, that's where you configure the PCI pass-through and select the specific profile you would like to add. Then the input and output, that's where you can set your VNC settings. And then we have the context. So that would be the another topic for today, the context. Remember, I told you that the image is not only the vanilla operating system, but also has that contextualization layer, that context bit. So the context helps you to fine tune your virtual machine thanks to that contextualization layer. So what you can do here, you can add more secure shell public keys. And in this case, as you can see, there is the reference for the secure shell public key value of the user. So if user has the SSH public key enrolled, then once the virtual machine is up and running, that user will be able to connect the virtual to that virtual machine using the secure shell, and it's that user's public key, uh, which is awesome. But you obviously can add any other public key or even remove that. So it is doable. Now, then the start script. So the start script is something that will be executed each time the virtual machine boots. So, for example, you can run some kind of a script, run some kind of commands, check for the updates, right? So, or install some kind of a software, which is not the greatest idea, but as the example, anything that root can run, um, you will be able to run here. Now, if it's a shell script, then you can leave it as is and just type uh, a command, or if it's something else, then you obviously need to set the interpreter first, like the bin Python. Now, then you can also prompt the user who is going to instantiate this virtual machine template for some specific values. So you will ask to enter, let's say, the user, the password, or let's say database name, or database password, or database server IP address, or FQDN, and then use this uh, variable in the in your custom script that will configure a connection to that, let's say, database. Now, or what you can alternatively do, and I will touch on this slightly later, you can ask user for some built-in values that are built into the logic of the contextualization to configure a virtual machine in a certain way. For example, to set the password for a root user, right? So you can say password, then set this as the password and add it here. So then the user will be prompted to enter a password, and then this password will be mapped to the password variable that you can use that is built into the contextualization logic. So it will set up the root user's password. We have a ton of these, um, a ton of these specific variables that you can use to set, let's say, the password, then to set the host name, to set the time zone, and do some other configurations of your operating system. Right. So that would be a very decent way how to quickly make sure that your VM that you've deployed actually does the or prepared the way you wish. Right. So and then these variables, the built-in variables, can be configured right here. So we already have some kind of a password set here, but we can delete it as the example, right? Then we can do something like time zone and set time zone to our location. So in my case, I will go with Europe Riga because that is my location. You can set uh, your location for the time zone. And then contextualization package will look at this environment variable and will set the time zone of that operating system to the Europe Riga. We also can use set host name, right, to set a host name. For example, that could be Alma 01. That obviously uh, comes with some other things that you can actually take some values from the template, like, for example, name, which is going to be name of this virtual machine. So you can add it to the host name, or you can use something like uname that will add the username of that user who deployed that virtual machine. So all that can be set using that customization, these context variables. But pretty much anything can be passed, right? So we can also add any uh, custom thing and just pass it as the variable if your script logic supports that. Yeah. So let's proceed with time zone, with the host name, and let's prompt our user to enter a password. Okay, so virtual machine template saved. Now it's time to deploy that. So to deploy it, it's pretty easy. Just click that play button, or you can deploy it from the VMs section. Again, clicking the plus button, and then you will be redirected to the instantiation page. Now, what's good about this is that, first of all, you can actually set the virtual machine name, like custom Alma, and then something like IDX with a percentage sign, which is going to add an ID to that. So you can distinguish one virtual machine from another. Now, this one also is very useful that you can deploy multiple VMs in the same shot, and these VMs are going to be configured the same way, right? From the same template, because down the line, I can add some adjustments during the instantiation, and then all of my VMs are going to have the same settings. So I know, let's add 2 virtual machines. Now here's the user input, and I'm going to set it as OpenNebula, all lowercase. So during the instantiation, again, some of the settings can be adjusted, like, for example, adding a different network, setting up the placement so you can force virtual machine to be deployed on a certain resources, on a certain host, so you can do it. Okay, let's click finish, and let's see how it goes. So as you can see, the virtual machine immediately received the IP address. So, and the second virtual machine also got deployed, right? So we can see both virtual machines in the running state, which also doesn't mean that it's like running. Obviously, they can perform the post-deployment stuff as well. Now, here are the IP addresses configured. Why we see those IP addresses? Because that network configures static IP addresses using the contextualization package. So that shows us the IP addresses. If we would only set our network with Ethernet, then we would only see the MAC address here and no IP address, obviously. Now we can see that which host is in use to run this VM, and obviously the ownership of that virtual machine. Now, using the VNC, I can open the terminal window and access my virtual machine. You can see connection is established. VM is still in the process of deployment, so it may take a little bit of time before I will be able to log in. But while we are still there, while we are performing this post configuration, let's see what we can do with this virtual machine, right? First thing first, we can take snapshots of a storage, right? So we have a virtual machine, and then virtual machine has an X amount of disks of images, and we can take snapshots and then revert back. We can also resize the individual disks and make them bigger than these were initially during the deployment. Please note you can scale up. Obviously, you cannot scale down. So this goes only one way. Then we can also reconfigure our network. We can remove some networks. We can attach some networks. So do the way we want. Then we also can take the full snapshot of a virtual machine, right? So whenever the virtual machine is running, we can take a snapshot that is going to include the disks, the memory state, and so on and so forth. So we can revert back anytime we want. Please note, this is the full snapshot of a VM. It's not the snapshot of an individual disk, right? So individual disks are snapshots are located here. Then what's also quite interesting, in the configuration tab, we can update those virtual machine configurations that we've initially configured. For example, add a new SSH public key, or change the password, or set a different host name, or change the time zone, and pretty much reconfigure it with the help of that. And as soon as we're going to change it, the contextualization update is going to kick in, and let's say we are going to change the password. So in case we forgot the password or forgot to set the password of that VM, we always can use the update VM configuration and change it. So we are not completely logged out. And last but not least, let's connect to that virtual machine using the VNC once again. I'm going to use, can I zoom in? Right, so I'm going to use root as the user and OpenNebula as the password. And as you can see, I'm in. And if we look at the date, well, that's pretty much the Eastern European time zone, and the date is set to a correct one. So can we curl OpenNebula.io? Yep. Obviously, that's a very inappropriate curl because it doesn't follow any redirect, but we can see that we are definitely connected to the internet, and we can access the OpenNebula page. I just don't want the whole HTML to be in on screen and make it completely unreadable. Right. So the VNC works. Check. Right. So then, under different conditions, you also can perform the secure shell from the web UI or RDP in case that is a Windows host. You can, a Windows VM. You can also connect via the RDP. That's just a setting that needs to be adjusted on the individual virtual network, so the OpenNebula knows how to access these protocols. And when you don't need those virtual machines anymore, just terminate them, and that's it. And virtual machines are going to be removed. Right. Cool. So let us slowly wrap up. I will look in the chat to check the questions. What about the GPU? Does OpenNebula has vGPU or GPU pass-through? Yeah, we do have the GPU pass-through. So that is available, but in the upcoming version 7.0 is going to have even better functionality on that. So stay tuned with us. Jose asks, does this VM customization utilize Cloud Init? No, we are utilizing our own contextualization package layer that performs these configurations. Although there is a Cloud Init support, but in this case, this is our own contextualization. So just Google for OpenNebula One apps, and this one, in the wiki page, you can access the contextualization info, and in case you're missing that, how to install it on your VM, right? So that would be the way to go in order to get a little bit more information on what is packed or bundled with these contextualization packages. So yeah, we are using our own tool set for that. Okay. All right. Any other questions? Don't forget to follow us on social network. If you have any questions and you maybe uh, in the future or you're not sure whether it's the right moment to ask a question, then feel free to join our community and search for your question there because it probably was already answered by the community. So join our forum. Um, Obviously, sign up for more webinars. So some of these are delivered by my colleagues, some of these are delivered by Truly Yours. And yeah, we'll be happy to see you in attending our other webinars. Either it's about the upcoming features of the 7.0 version, or maybe the next one from from me that will be about the One Apps and how to build your OpenNebula compatible image using the One Apps toolset.